Hello, hello, and welcome. I totally forgot, did not realize we have the wrong branding over here. There we are.
Round two.
Yes, hello, guys, and welcome to the Beauty of Breathing podcast. I have a very special guest with us today. She's a really good friend of mine, Mollie Eastman. Welcome, welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor. And I've had the honor of working with you recently on my own tongue tie and Vivair journey. So more to discuss.
Yeah, 100%. So I know that you're like the queen of circadian rhythm, and I cannot wait for you to share some of that with us. But I do want to start by sharing with everybody how we first met.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. How did we first meet? I remember it vividly. We were in Stanford for a sleep event with a focus around all things on sleep optimization, but certainly so respiratory tendencies while asleep. And you were able to help support and educate so many people on these topics. And you were just, it was wonderful to connect there. And then we got to do Sleep 2022 together, which was so
It's crazy because Dr. Stanley Liu invited me to come to Stanford to the Good Sleep lecture that they have every year. And you guys, if you guys know Stanley, you know how much he is into sleep technology. So they also had some really cool companies over there talking about technology. And he had also invited Mollie. So we met over there. It was May of 2022, something like that.
That sounds
and
right.
Then,
right when then we did the Sleep 2022 event. Yeah.
Then it was like 2 weeks after, and I had no idea. And you guys started asking me, so you're going to Sleep 2022? I'm like, what is that?
Yeah. And you just rolled with it. I thought it was so cool.
Yeah.
Yep, I'm doing it. Let's go.
You guys said it's in North Carolina this year. I was like, I can drive to North Carolina. It's going to be easy. So then we met again over there. And oh my goodness, the rest is history. I've been learning so much from you. And I would love for you to introduce yourself to our listeners and let them know who you are. How did you end up in the sleep field?
Yes, absolutely. So really, it was a journey of my own insomnia that I went through a period of time years back that totally changed the course of my life. When I went to the doctors, I left with sleeping pills, which if anyone's struggling with their sleep, that is not first-line treatment or supposed to be first-line treatment. And so when that happened, I knew that I really had to get at the source of this, figure it out myself. And what I discovered changed the course of my life. Enough so that I started the entire company Sleep is a Skill. And now I have a niche in high stakes poker. So I work with a lot of high stakes poker players on optimizing their sleep, have a number 2 sleep podcast, talk sleep all day, every day.
That is incredible. So let's talk a little bit about circadian rhythm. What is it exactly and why should we be paying attention to it?
Yes. Okay. So beginning with your kind of what this is, it's this 24-hour rhythm that's really aligned with the rhythms of nature, guided by these environmental cues. So our light-dark environment, our temperature, meal timing are a couple of these key ones, but there are more. And so historically, these really aligned with the rhythms of nature. So they just kind of happened. But what the problem has become is that we've gone indoors. And that's where things have gone awry. Have you related to any of these topics yourself?
As we have bright white light on my face right now, and it's okay at this time. However, it stays on until 10 p.m.
I know.
When I finish working, what is the big problem with all of these artificial lights that we have nowadays?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, are you under those until 10 p.m. usually?
Well, a lot of times I work until super late.
Oh, no. Okay. So this is perfect. I'm so glad you're sharing about this because so many people are dealing with this, right? So what does that do automatically? That sets us up for circadian dysregulation. And you're not alone. Anyone who's under artificial lights at night indoors, which is like most of the population, is dealing with exactly that. So what do we want to do? Well, one, we just want to get connected to what the problem is. So I'm calling it the indoor issue, the fact that as of 2001, the EPA did a study and they found that the average American was spending well over 93% of their time indoors. And so that's largely in these, kind of static lighting environments, like exactly what you described. So perfectly described, because it's like, okay, I'm getting the same light signals and cues most of the day into the night. And that's also applying to things like temperature. So most people are supposed to say like 72-degree temperature, kind of so like a missing of a high amplitude shift in their environment. So everything's sort of static, the same lighting environment, the same temperature environment all day, every day. Now we might be like, well, what's the big deal about that? If you picture, like, you know, if you can just kind of have that moment conjure up in your history of in your mind when you would go like with the family or whatever to the beach, and you go to the beach and during the day, it's like the sand is so hot, like you're, you know, can't even move around. It's like you're burning your feet. It's so hot on you. You're swimming. It's like you can't cool yourself off enough. Then when the sun sets, suddenly it's like, oh my God, the sand's cold. I need my beach sweaters and the whole thing. And it's a very clear change. Those two things are often tethered together, and they are our most powerful zeitgebers or time givers. So in order of importance, so it appears to be light dark being the most important time giver or zeitgeber that entrains that circadian rhythm, that 24-hour, you know, clock that I was mentioning. And by the way, those clocks are virtually exist in virtually every cell and organ in your body. So trillions of clocks. So if you really want to sleep well, be well, we have to make sure that these clocks are attuned and aligned with the rhythms of nature. But so back to that kind of beach example, if we've got the light dark signals so clear of a high amplitude, super bright days, and then markedly dark nights, because, you know, when you're on the beach, it's usually just maybe the stars, you don't see a whole heck of a lot. So it's clear, right? And the temperature that tethers with it, because when the sun does set, then that brings on with it the heat that was coming from it, quite obviously. So when that's gone and it's suddenly so much cooler, that those two cueing mechanisms tell the body, oh, okay, I guess we're preparing for bed soon. I guess it's time to amp up the melatonin production that we're engaging in to prepare for bed, because melatonin is more of a preparatory hormone. So it's helping to prepare us for bed. And so all those things are happening with two cues. But we want to understand, even if you get nothing else out of what I'm talking about, you want to be left with the fact that you want to create for yourself brighter days and darker nights. And with that, bright or warmer days and cooler nights than you might normally indulge in or partake in. And so when we're talking cooler, a lot of people want to know specifics. When they're in their bedroom, the recommendations from the Sleep Foundation are anywhere from 60 to 67 degrees Fahrenheit. So for the average person, that might be a lot cooler than they're normally used to. So you're playing with that. And then I'm also often mentioning, if available for people, doing like cooling mattress toppers or any of these things that can step it up, right? Because we have one of the largest Oura Ring dashboards from a sleep optimization perspective. So we see a lot of data. And so there's very few things that I see really move the needle kind of overnight. And one of those things is temperature and kind of really augmenting and playing with those temperature kind of levers. So those are two things to start with. Now I can share that there's many more zeitgebers or time givers. So if you keep going, meal timing, meal type acts as a zeitgeber. If you go into exercise timing, exercise type, that acts as a zeitgeber. Thought timing, I've kind of coined this term around thought timing, but it's really just denoting the fact that our thoughts exist on a circadian rhythm as well, which is really fascinating.
Wow.
So it's like if you are dealing with, say you wake up in the wee hours of the morning and you're thinking like all the worst possible things that could ever happen. Actually something that we've measurably seen in certain research. One that I find fascinating is called the Mind After Midnight research. And it's a study that discovered some of these different tendencies of the mind and the thought processes in the wee hours in the morning, including, sadly, an uptick in suicidality rates and, you know, this kind of black and white thinking and taking action from a place of these kind of flawed thoughts patterns in the, you know, wee hours of the night. So the practical takeaways with that can be, if you do wake up in the middle of the night or have trouble falling asleep and you're thinking kind of all the worst case scenarios, knowing, almost making like a personal contract with yourself, hopefully to not quite believe every thought that's coming out in those, you know, times of the night, saying that it will look very different in the morning.
Wow. Yeah. This is so interesting that you mentioned that. I have found myself When I decide to stay up late for work or for any other reason, then
Yes.
my thoughts are totally different. Around that
Right.
time, midnight, 1 in the morning, it's like all of a sudden you're scared, you're more fearful,
Yes.
and I've caught myself going like, hold on. It was
Yes.
8 p.m. not long ago, and I wasn't having these feelings and these thoughts. Why now? Nothing has really changed.
Exactly.
I'm still safe. So that is so interesting you mentioned that. I did not know there was research behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the cool things too, is that the more we know, the more we can kind of understand some of these patterns and then be less sort of sideswiped when they're occurring. And we're likely to see an uptick of that, of course, kind of like a spillover effect or a snowballing effect. If you are dealing with lots of, stressors and higher cortisol at certain periods of time, for any of
Mhm.
us, we're all going to have certain times where we're more stressed. And then we might have more tendency to wake up. And now when you're waking up, then you might be thinking all those types of thoughts. But it's like, as we peel back the layers and know, oh, this is really normal. There's nothing like innately weird or crazy about me having these sort of thoughts. So that can really help to set the tone to trust that things will look different in the daytime hours, essentially. But to put that a bow on all that, that's thought timing. And so that's a really fascinating one that so you can think of how could that impact our circadian rhythm. Well, if we go into more of a cortisol inducing state in the evening, that can impair some of our ability to create melatonin because they can be a bit at odds. And that can be more wake promoting, kind of adrenaline, a number of things that
Mhm.
be difficult to achieve the sleep that we're looking to achieve. And so we look at the thought timing and we want to manage that. The last one is chronopharmacology. And so that's just chrono meaning kind of time, and pharmacology meaning just different types of drugs. And that could be as basic as, your coffee, your alcohol, your THCs, supplements, prescriptions. But if we peel back the layers on all those, what are the optimal timing for those, dosing of that? Are some things maybe serving you or not serving you? That's an audit that we'd want to take, because sometimes people are taking things at the wrong times, or the wrong
Mhm.
dosage that's actually hurting their sleep. So we want to make sure we're not missing some of that.
So for the general public right now, if I just want to kind of reset and realign my circadian rhythm, what
Yes.
are some basic things that I can
So
do?
good. So good. I'm glad you asked that. Because one, I hope that this leaves people hopefully like interested, like, oh my God, there's this whole world. And it's also kind of looking at chronobiology, the science of time and how time affects our whole biology. So it's a whole area of study. So hopefully you're like, maybe slightly interested enough to take action and learn more. But if you're like, listen, I'm busy, I just want to know, what do I do? Here's what we want to do. So two key anchor habits that I have everyone we work with take is one, we're aiming to ensure that we're mining that light dark cycle so that we're having brighter days, darker nights, and that you're getting
Mhm.
bright light exposure really as quickly upon awakening as you can. And ideally that you're going physically outside to get that. I'm sure a lot of people probably listening to this are more maybe in vogue or like in these conversations than the average person. So they've maybe heard of more of this conversation of like sunlight gazing, sunlight anchoring, light viewing behaviors. And there's for good reason, because it makes such
Yeah.
a difference. We had Dr. Sachin Panda on the podcast, and it was one of our most popular episodes. And one of the things he pointed to was what his research has discovered is needing about 1 hour of
Mm.
time outside with getting that bright light in your eyes and on your skin to support proper melatonin production at night, which is really
Mhm.
interesting. A lot of people would be like, well, why would that make sense? Like, if melatonin's the hormone of darkness, why would it be about getting that light? Well, it turns out it's a longer conversation for this, but one factor has to do with subcellular melatonin. We used to think melatonin was only created in the brain. Now we know that it's created in other parts of the body, including the mitochondria. And we need that bright light to fulfill on that goal. So you're wanting to get that first shot of bright light. A new app that I like is called the My Circadian app. So it's you one, and it's great. So that one can really help, wherever you are, geotag you, because there's going to be different protocols based on where you Part of the reason I moved to Austin from New York was because I wanted to be able to be more easily circadian aligned, and I don't want it to be cold all the time doing it. So,
oh my gosh.
If you are in a northern latitude location, then you're going to need to step into more cold, or, because that's kind of the bad news insight is most people say, well, all winter it's cold, so I guess I just forget this. No, you want to You want to actually be outside even more than you might normally have been, because the sun is having to stretch further across the horizon to get to you in those northern latitude locations. So as a result, you actually have to be outside longer to fulfill on that. So that's the first one, is that bright, light in the morning. And then the second one is knowing, so tethered to that, is that your darkness is key. So just in 2023, nearly 250 circadian scientists referencing nearly 2,700 peer-reviewed publications are all calling for warning labels on light bulbs when used at night. And they're right? So they're citing obesity, diabetes, heart disease, reproductive disorders, psychiatric disorders, cancers, and poor sleep. So it's a laundry list of, and that's simply by using just ordinary light bulbs at night. So the next thing that I'd want people to do is I want them to prioritize getting outside as much as possible first thing in the morning, especially in the evening post sunset. I want you to play the game of swapping your light bulbs. So swapping your light bulbs, like, one at a time, and moving those over to orange bulbs, red bulbs, because we're trying to mimic fire. We're trying to mimic what we evolved under here for, thousands and millions of years. So, so when we understand that, we know that those are the least likely light to impact our melatonin production and throw off our sleep-wake cycle. So now you're dousing yourself in red in the evening. Maybe it looks weird. If you don't want it to look so weird, if you can get yourself incandescent lights, that could be an option, but they were made illegal, unfortunately, in the United States just a year ago. So silly. So then if not that, another kind of somewhat socially acceptable one is like Himalayan salt lamps. Moving it more like an orangey pinky hue could be another option. But so you take those steps to change your lighting environment, also bringing in blue blockers that are either orange or red while you're watching like TV or something that maybe is still going to be that blue light source. So you're taking those steps. Now, the next anchor habit that I have everyone do right away, it's so funny. I literally just got off a client call and was talking about this for like the better part of the client call. And it's so basic and it's so boring that most people are going to overlook it. So what it is having consistent wake up time 7 days, 7 days a week. So most people will say, oh yeah, I'm pretty good at that. But then I look at their stats and yeah, maybe they're good at that 5 days a week, 4 days a week, but then the weekend comes and then they're like, all over the place. So instead, can you bring this about? Because it's going to do so many beautiful things for your health, for your circadian rhythm. So the client that I was just talking to right before this, this was our first intro call. So I'm just looking at all of her Oura Ring stats, and they were like, it's like spiky. So spike crash for the wake up time, right? And problem, because now your circadian rhythm has no real clue of what time is it, what time do we fire that strong cortisol pulse, what time do we fire that strong melatonin pulse in the evening. Those things are important.
People don't realize that the melatonin, the cortisol, these are all hormones. And these hormones are connected to a clock, and that's your circadian rhythm. So that's why we recommend the bright light in the morning. Make sure you take your glasses off. You want also your eyes to be free and clear, nothing in the way. This morning when Zoe woke up, I told her to take the dog out, and it was this beautiful sun shining out there. And I was like, go ahead and just hang out there for a minute. Get your sun also in the morning. So important. But it's because it's what kind of regulates your body clock. It is this light and this darkness. So yes, in order for the melatonin to be released at night, you have to make sure that all the other things are also in place to get this clock to start going. There are so many other hormones that are so important that are supposed to be released in the middle of the night whenever you are in deep sleep.
Yes.
We talk about all the time ghrelin and leptin that is going to help you stay full or feel full during the day and not get you so hungry. And then if you're not breathing well, if you're not reaching deep sleep, then everything is just out of whack. Again, the chicken or the egg, what do you work on first? We all know that all these issues can come, but is it the poor sleep that's causing your whole health to kind of go downhill? We could literally stay here for hours and keep talking about.
Yes, good. And not to mention the insidious nature of poor sleep, where it spiders into many aspects of health and well-being, including mental health, including the age-old issues with anxiety and depression and certain things that absolutely show up in our sleep results. And it can be troublesome because, unfortunately, then the more anxious and disrupted our sleep becomes, then with that sleep deprivation tends to come more of a tendency to be anxious and, depressive tendencies. So it can kind of go in this vicious cycle. We also know that from a mental health perspective, there's not a single disorder out of the DSM that doesn't have a, coupling of a problem with sleep. So mismanagement of how we're managing our sleep. So these things are very clear in that domain of life, but it spills into our cardiovascular health, into neurodegenerative disorders. That's a big reason why sleep got a lot more press a few years back. Was in 2012, the discovery of something called glymphatic drainage with a G versus, right?
Which was a woman that found out.
Yes. Raise the roof, right? So, it's a big deal because then suddenly people started to realize, wait a minute, if there appears to be some of this correlation between insufficient sleep and neurodegenerative disorders, this could give us a pathway for action for people that previously might have said, oh, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, I hope I get it, not much I can do. Whereas if this is accurate, what we're seeing, sort of these signs and patterns, then it could very well make a lot of sense as we prioritize our sleep. Then that could be supportive of staving off some of those disorders. So there's a lot of aspects of health that, does bring in that kind of chicken or the egg. Another very clear one is blood sugar regulation. I know you mentioned some of these hormones, leptin and ghrelin. And if we are having unstable or poor quality sleep, and that goes right back into the light thing. So there's even really fascinating research of pretty low amounts of light exposure while you're sleeping, actually impacting your glucose stability the next day.
Wow.
So we're tagging if someone just has sort of like a strong nightlight or something going on in their bedroom, or say they've got street lights coming in or something. This is where you want to make sure that you can pass the hand test. So put your hand up while you're in your bedroom. And if you can still see your hand while you're in your bedroom, then we want to take more action to make sure that it's totally blackout. And even if it doesn't look, you met, I think you met my husband, Blake, right, at Stanford.
Yes.
And so the two of us, we were kind of digital nomads for about 3 years, back and forth to Southeast Asia, to New York, back and, toggling all back and forth. So during that time, we would travel at different points with say if we end up in a Airbnb that just, now it's not sleep conducive. We'd have really thick garbage bags that were really opaque, black, kind of leaf bags. And then you could just tape them up. So it doesn't have to look cute, do what you got to do, because it's going to make such a difference for the quality of that sleep, and then spill over into surprising aspects of health. We were mentioning with the blood sugar or other things.
And I wonder if that has to do with the connection of melatonin and insulin, how it's, inversely related.
Oh, there's huge aspects here. So, one, an area of research around blood sugar that's really exciting is understanding that there's a real drug-like effect with the presence of light dark. So for instance, if you're dealing with stress, and we know that stress and cortisol impacts your glucose all throughout the course of the day. So say you have a really stressful, a big presentation or game time, something or other, then you can commonly see, if you're wearing a continuous glucose monitor, a big spike. And so you might not have even eaten a thing, but that might just be stress related. Well, another thing that can be impacting your stress is bright light that's very blue rich. So that is cortisol inducing. So we know upticking your cortisol into, the wee hours, like, so as you're winding down, which we don't want to be cultivating, and then while you're sleeping throughout the course of the night. So that can further impact that blood sugar stability goals. So one of the best things you can do for trying to manage blood sugar, to support a whole like kind of foundation by which you build all these other habits on, is to have the brighter days and the darker nights, including when you're eating. So eating like outside is part of our goal, and that's a whole other quantum conversation. But the next thing I would say too is that when we're talking about all these benefits for light, dark, and how this impacts our health, it makes a lot of, we would be wrong, or it would behoove us to not step over the fact that many people in the United States are low in vitamin D, and we know that low vitamin D plays such a role. I believe you had Dr. Sasha Gomanek on the ages back, and she did a fantastic job. She's been doing a great job of kind of sharing this information of how important vitamin D is. So if we think of vitamin D as kind of that precursor to serotonin, precursor to melatonin, it's part of that kind of cocktail to get you to sufficient melatonin in the evening. And if most of us are deficient, or thinking, well, we can just supplement our way out of the problem, it's appearing that that's not quite the whole story. So there seems to be other benefits that come from getting that bright light on your skin. So if you're someone that's in a northern latitude location, there are entire stretches of time throughout the winter when you have a window that you won't be able to make sufficient vitamin D, unfortunately. So for my northern latitude location people, I often have them get light sources that can make vitamin D from a lamp. So two of these, right? Two of these, one being the Spurdy lamp. And that one was killing it during COVID because people were starting to connect the dots with, vitamin D and viral load and immune function and sleep and the whole. So they were selling out like every time they would have a new batch. And I have no affiliation with this company, but so Spurdy, and often it can be covered under insurance if you have certain conditions like autoimmune, conditions and skin health conditions, et cetera. So that's one. The second one is called Chroma D. And what I like about them is that it can also generate vitamin D from a light, but it can, it's layered in with more red light, which we know there's a lot of benefit using red light for overall health and well-being and sleep, including melatonin production seems to be in certain studies supportive of building more melatonin production, lowering of inflammation, help from kind of a stress load perspective, especially also TBI for people with traumatic brain injury, have a lot of sleep issues commonly. And so that can be another kind of support. So if we pan back out, it's really getting curious about the physics of light and how it's such a big topic. You can literally spend the entire podcast talking about it. And get really granular with the fact that there's little tweaks that you can do throughout the course of the day. So for instance, if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, this is not realistic. I drive to work an hour and like, how am I going to do this? Even rolling down the window in your car to make sure that it's unadulterated light, because the light that goes through those windows is altered in a particular way. So we want to aim so that it's just coming to us unabashedly, so we get the full spectrum of light. So we're getting the blue by day, but also balanced by that infrared light, kind of healing light, beneficial for hormonal cues, like you were speaking to that. So all of those things are key. And if you're wondering when to prioritize, say like that 1 hour that we talked about, I would just suggest to front load your bright light exposure where possible. So if you're playing with your calendar of like where to put these things, you're doing that in the front half.
Amazing. So for my children, I'm not sure if, I think this is really helpful. Again, after 6 p.m., as soon as the sun goes down, I try not to have any bright lights on. So I got them the Philips lights that you can choose the color, and I put it as the lamps in their room. So as soon as we're ready to go to bed and we go upstairs, both of their rooms are already red. That's the only light that they're allowed to have. And you can kind of, measure if you want a little bit of light, a lot of light. But this is so interesting. And you can, timer these things where it turns on already in red and then it shuts off after they fall asleep a little bit after. But I felt like it was a really easy way to put that into our routine.
No, I love that you did that. I just want to acknowledge you because I just gave a talk in Dallas the other day, and it was like this whole room and people are asking questions and they were like, well, but I have kids and pets and blah, blah, blah. So it's not practical. And yet one of the things we got to as like a whole group was, oh, actually, not only could we still set this up the same way you did, but actually bring those benefits to our kids, because kids are very much reliant and need that presence of the circadian mechanisms just as much, or you could argue even more maybe, because they're growing minds and bodies and whatever. Not to mention even the benefits that can come from pets. So this is a whole other thing. We actually are going to have a circadian vet, a circadian so stay tuned. But the fact that our pets also we know this measurably from like marine life. So we know that, say, like in ocean environments and what have you, when we're shining all of our man-made bright, flood type lights, it impacts the behavior of the marine life. So, and this is like a big conversation around from a circadian perspective. How can we make this circadian line to be mindful of our impact on, other living things? And the same rules apply for like our pets. We see so many animals that are taking, they were giving them CBD for their anxiety and all that. It's certainly out of my scope to weigh in on that. But I would just say that it's interesting. I would be curious what could support the whole household, everyone under the roof, by bringing that circadian aligned mechanisms. Because you want to remember that it's only been 145 years since we created the incandescent light bulb, since Edison created the light bulb. So 145 years is like a blip of time as compared to the millions of years in our ancestry. So we have not evolved to have this sort of 24-hour lifestyle. And even before that, you might say, well, we had candles and lanterns. Candles and lanterns, one, had different wavelengths of the type of light that we're exposed to with LEDs, especially. And so now we're getting these huge shots of blue banded light without the presence of all these other wavelength elements in the same ratio. And so when we did have candles, it would be very low lux output. And you can test this with like that app I was mentioning, the My Circadian app. So you can measure the amount of light in the environment and say, oh, wow, okay. So, maybe I have way too much bright light in the evening and way little in the daytime. So that same scientific consensus that I was mentioning that was calling for warning labels on light bulbs when it was all put together by almost 248 circadian scientists. And one of the things that they pointed to was that their estimations of the average person in modernity appears to be having their light signals around 100 times too dim by day and around 100 times too bright by night as compared to our brightest moonlit evening. So like what you would have normally been exposed to in nature. So it's just a complete upside down world. And that is what's making it so much harder for people to be able to fall asleep, stay asleep. That's why people are needing to, buy melatonin and all these sort of things and struggling.
We have a comment I have to read. Love the black garbage bag story. I did the same thing when I was a medical student years ago and could not afford drapes. Great way to keep the bedroom dark and sleep well. Thank you. This is great. Before we go, one last thing that I want you to share with us. I know you have so much knowledge around all of these different ways that we can keep up with our sleep. So the Oura Ring is one of them. How accurate are these things?
So good. Yeah. Well, I'm happy to hear that feedback. I grew up with not a lot of money, middle of nowhere Maine. And so it's really a commitment to me that we can kind of get out these hacks or, work around for everyone to really help make a difference with their sleep, no matter our budget. Right. But as far as the tracking, so what makes sense to kind of invest in, what makes sense to pay attention to? Okay. So let's say for 2024 right now, and I'm saying that, prefacing that because I fully anticipate that in the near future, things are likely to have some, mix-ups or like new exciting pieces of tech. We know things are like on the horizon, but still for right now, I still am an advocate for Oura Ring for sleep. My next second would be Whoop Band. And Whoop can be really great for more of my athletic kind of prone characters. So like, they really value that more accurate data by day. Whoop does a great job with that. But Oura Ring is really wonderful with tracking your sleep, and also for women of menstruating age. It really does a great job at tracking your cycle, which, then you start to see how much that plays a role in your sleep results, your stress results, like all of these things, right? So that's really, really brilliant. And then there are other trackers, of course, but I'm just highlighting those two. And so with those, when we're starting to look at the stats, I'll say the least accurate pieces of data are the sleep stage classifications. So your deep sleep and your REM and your light sleep, when they're breaking all that down, so Oura Ring right now is around a 79% accuracy, although the new ring is supposed to be improving upon that accuracy. So, even if we're getting into like the mid 80s, understanding that even in lab, if you were to go into a sleep lab, the agreement is still more in the mid 80s as far as the agreement as, were you in deep sleep, were you in REM, et cetera, et cetera. So still have a lot of questions about that, and it does require more brain-based information than something on your hand or wrist can really get. So I think there's still a lot of room for improvement there. And unfortunately, that's where I see a lot of people spending a lot of their time, is they're like, I want to improve my deep sleep, I want to improve my REM, et cetera. So instead, areas that you could focus on with a bit more kind of confidence would be some of your sleep. So understanding, are you asleep or are you awake? They're pretty good at that now. So, usually in around like the low 90s or so for accuracy. So pretty solid at that. They may have some abnormalities periodically, but for the most part, you get a good idea of that. And then that also goes into wake time. So how long did it take you to fall asleep? How much are you awake throughout the course of the night, and for what length of time were you awake? And those can be really important. And you can speak to the cows come home, to say my old stuff, around things like sleep apnea and science for that and testing for this, because it can sound the alarms for signs of things like sleep apnea when we see lots of wake up tics throughout the course of the night, lots of movement, maybe you're egregiously going after more sleep but still feeling fatigued, all these different signs on the trackers. And lastly, so I'd say, you're really minding that, looking at sleep efficiency during when you're in bed, how much time are you actually asleep versus awake? So looking into all those, but then I'd also really have people pay attention to the more nervous system indicators. So understanding things like your heart rate variability, your heart rate, your respiratory rate, your body temperature, your blood oxygen, when it isn't as accurate, but you can take a glance at that. But I would say certainly paying more attention to the heart rate variability and the respiratory rate especially can be really insightful to your stress load and some trends that might be there. Does that answer that question around the wearables?
Mollie, 100%.
Okay,
and the more that you talk, the more questions I have, but I know that we are out of time, so we're going to have to do this again at another time.
Definitely. I would love that.
Thank you so much for your time, for hanging out with us, and for sharing so much incredible knowledge with our listeners. We really appreciate you. If you guys want to keep up with Mollie, please go follow her podcast. It's Sleep is a Skill. And her Instagram is mollie.eastman. Go check her out and enjoy everything that she has to offer out there. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm excited to have you on our podcast to share your knowledge. So appreciate you.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, everybody. We'll see you later.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you. Appreciate it.